Looking to the sky in the summer of 310, Constantine saw the message written in the heavens, illuminated by the very rays of the sun. He told all who would listen that on this day a new god was calling him to his service, and that this new patron deity promised him a long reign, and that he would be the instrument of supernatural forces beyond the comprehension of any man. Constantine would no longer devote himself to the cult of the war god Mars. Instead, he would mark himself as the emissary of this other deity, the one who had chosen him and had sent him such a miraculous sign. It's a riveting story, which just makes it a shame that the episode has been largely forgotten, even by those interested in the classical past and the history of early Christianity. For while the tale of Constantine's conversion to Christianity is one of the most influential episodes in Western history, his vision of Christ bearing the famous message, "In this sign, conquer," was said to have occurred before the Battle of the Milvian Bridge in 312, 2 years after this earlier, forgotten vision, in which the heavenly messenger was not the prophet from Nazareth, but the much more familiar pagan solar deity, Apollo. Many of us go our entire lives without a profound religious experience of any sort. Constantine was lucky enough to not just have two, but to be spoken to by completely different gods, representing radically different religions. Maybe Constantine was just lucky, or maybe there was some unknown divine agency working behind the scenes to advance his career. After all, he would defy the odds to win the throne for himself, and would ultimately prove to be the most influential Roman emperor ever. The lasting impact of Constantine can chiefly be attributed to his momentous decision to convert to Christianity, setting this previously somewhat niche religion on a path to global dominance, and forever altering the course of world history. There can be little doubt of the impact of Constantine's decision, but the rationale for his conversion remains perplexing millennia later. So did he convert for Machiavellian political purposes, or because of a profound new belief in the Christian God? Though these are the terms of the popular debate, I believe it's a mistake to split the decision into two diametrically opposed categories. The human mind is a messy beast, and rarely are any of our decisions arrived at through motivations that can be attributed to a single, pure factor. The ancients were the same way, and just like us, their religious practices and beliefs tended to be shaped by their own personal predilections and desires, as well as the overall structure of the society in which they lived, and the relative social position in which they found themselves. But though we can trace a genealogy of certain aspects of religious belief, that in no way diminishes the profoundly personal nature of interior religious faith, or that the convictions which form in us due to spiritual reflection can push back against the very societies in which they initially took shape. As one of the most fascinating aspects of the human experience, and consciousness itself, religion is very hard to pin down, even today, for those operating in the same cultural backdrop as ourselves. And so anyone who tells you that they can relay the inner workings of Constantine's mind on this matter is vastly overstating their case. That being said, it is my belief that Constantine's conversion was guided by a personal religious conviction, and while politics did play a role, how could it not, temporal concerns were not the primary motivation for his conversion. It is frequently claimed that Constantine's conversion was a sham, little more than an attempt to mobilize a potential power block behind him in his bid for absolute control of the Roman state. Though his real motivations are beyond our knowledge as historians, I do feel comfortable dismissing this maximalist statement. Central to this argument is the contention that the clear hierarchy of the Christian Church was identified by Constantine as a vehicle he could use to advance his interests, and that the religion's monotheist theology was well suited to his claims of divine patronage and favor. Whereas some pagan imperial claimants could be said to have been chosen by Jupiter, another may answer in turn that he was chosen by Apollo. Constantine could circumvent these squabbles over which god had selected which potential emperor, if he was the chosen ruler of the one and only true God. Constantine had won power through a civil war and knew just how easily a successful general could claim the throne for himself. After all, Rome had spent much of the past 100 years embroiled in a series of never-ending civil wars that prevented any ruler from resting too easily on the throne. Putting a stop to this cycle was paramount to his efforts to found a new dynasty, so he leveraged religion to codify his place at the top of Roman society. Some of the evidence presented in support of this theory is that while Constantine was very invested in the creation of a unified church doctrine, convening the Council of Nicaea, for instance, he seemed less interested in practicing his new religion with the same fervor as many Christians of his era. For example, he rarely attended Mass and was not formally baptized until he was on his deathbed. In addition, pagan iconography, including the solar deity Sol Invictus, was present on his coins until roughly 324, 12 years after his supposed miraculous vision. This seems like a convincing case, but upon further examination, holes quickly emerge in the theory that Constantine's conversion was driven entirely by political considerations. For one, adherence to Christianity accounted for only between 5 to 10% of the empire's population, and the practitioners were concentrated primarily in eastern urban areas that were far from Constantine's power base in Britain and Gaul. Much has been said of how the growing acceptance among the elites of Christian doctrine made the faith more palatable to Constantine, with even senators, magistrates, and highly educated philosophers adopting a faith that had at its beginnings been primarily the refuge of women, the poor, slaves, and others that were unable to participate fully in Roman society. Hi, if you're enjoying the video, please take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel, as doing so really helps us out. Thank you. But though the body of believers was more diverse than ever, one group was drastically underrepresented in the church: the army. Though it had somewhat dissipated by this point, early Christians had a pacifist outlook that tended to discourage military service, and during the era of Constantine, the legions were devoted to the worship of the more militaristic god Mithras. Constantine himself was also quite dependent on troops raised from among the Germanic tribes, a group that would have had minimal exposure to Christianity, meaning that his conversion could drive a wedge between him and his most important soldiers. In an era when emperors depended first and foremost on the army to defend their claim against potential usurpers, these factors make Constantine's decision look like political malpractice, not an insightful masterstroke. Constantine does not appear to have been as outwardly zealous about his faith as his Christian contemporaries, but this should not be as shocking as it initially appears. For starters, his infrequent attendance at Mass was probably a result of his busy imperial schedule. We know that he had a personal Christian priest traveling with him even before his vision at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, and that he was surrounded by high-ranking clergy at the imperial court during his rule. Throughout his reign, Constantine spearheaded numerous moral reforms that show the growing influence of Christian thought. These included taking radical steps to fundamentally alter key aspects of Roman society, such as comprehensive new protections for slaves, legislating the end of gladiatorial games and beast hunts, as well as forbidding execution by crucifixion. He also strengthened marriage law by forbidding married men to keep women as concubines. These may look like common sense to us, but that is because Christianity has informed every aspect of our modern values in the West. Under the pagan emperors, all of these unseemly behaviors were viewed as perfectly right and proper. At a time when Christians were still a small minority, it took political courage to end some of these defining aspects of Roman culture and bring them in line with Christian religious convictions. The limited political upside to these new laws makes it likely that Constantine believed personally in their necessity. But even in the midst of these Christian moral reforms, Constantine still used pagan iconography. Surely this speaks to some indecisiveness on his part. Perhaps, but I'm very sympathetic to the view that Constantine may have acknowledged the existence of the Christian God in 312, but in so doing only placed him within the pantheon of existing gods, with a full conversion to dogmatic monotheism coming later. True conversion required a fundamental shift in theological worldview, and it may have taken time for Constantine to shake off his pagan upbringing and confess the existence of a single god. But another possibility is that pagan iconography persisted because it was so intertwined with images of the Roman state that little thought was given to the presence of pagan deities on coins or public artwork intended for propaganda purposes. Throughout the United States, courts frequently feature the statue of the Lady Justice, a figure inspired by the Roman goddess Justitia. But no one walking into courtrooms today acknowledges the existence of this deity, and Christians have no qualms about entering courtrooms where these statues are present. To put this idea in ancient context, the goddess Tyche and the god Orontes appear on coins issued by the Byzantine Emperor Justin I in 527, and no one doubts that he was a firm Christian. Constantine putting off his baptism until he lay on his deathbed was also not a sign of religious indecisiveness, as is often reported, but rather a standard practice in his day, when Christians felt that taking the sacrament of baptism at the last possible moment would diminish their culpability for any sins committed after they had been formally accepted into the church. So while a degree of skepticism should still be applied to the claims of Constantine, like all other emperors, I'm inclined to believe that his conversion was heartfelt. Yet moral reforms aside, his personal life does not seem to reflect a deep spiritual rebirth that one typically associates with conversion. But this doesn't mean he wasn't a Christian. He was probably just a bad Christian. Still, he had much more to lose than to gain by renouncing traditional religion, and the sheer radicalness of his decision and its seeming inexplicability by the tools we use as historians to analyze the past means that it was likely driven by a profound mystical religious experience like the one he describes. Regardless of what he actually saw on that day, he certainly believed that he saw something. But asking why Constantine converted is ultimately asking the wrong question for two distinct reasons. Not only because it places too much power in the hands of a single individual to shape history, when in reality, the world is shaped by forces, trends, and factors that far surpass any single individual, even Roman emperors. Ultimately, Constantine's conversion to Christianity was the result of a combination of political, religious, and philosophical trends dating back centuries. It's also antithetical to our efforts on this channel to democratize the telling of history to place such an emphasis on the decisions of a single great man to create history. After all, men may make their own history, but they do not choose the circumstances under which they make it. But the question is also inappropriate for a second reason, because in cases like this, surrounding intensely personal decisions, the why of history is ultimately inaccessible to us. We have no way of knowing Constantine's interior mind, and typically, when historians attempt to provide what they view as the true story behind the conversion, they really only tell us about themselves. Whether they think of Constantine as a cynical con artist or as a world historical figure who earned his place among the greatest leaders of all time is often a proxy for their belief on whether the adoption of Christianity was a positive or a negative development. So take my analysis with a grain of salt. I have no more access to the mental state of a man who lived 1700 years ago than anyone else alive today, and as you investigate the matter further, do your best to prevent your feelings on modern religion from impacting your judgment on how a Roman emperor in a pre-scientific era may have interpreted an inexplicable bright light in the sky.